What's going on, guys? 100-man Commander Slate D. Biggs here with some primo, grade A, cream of the crop, Kingdom content. Before I get further into the video, I'd like to take a moment just to say that you guys are the real ones. Thank you for enjoying the videos. It's awesome that I can express my passion for manga and anime that I genuinely enjoy, and you all appreciate my perspective, for better or for worse. Thank you, seriously, for being here. Also, I would greatly appreciate it if you'd leave a like on the video to let me know how you feel about it. Subscribe to the channel to keep up with all of the dope Kingdom content, as well as the rest of the anime and manga content that we put out. Now, without any further ado, let's quit blueballing you and get right into the topic of this video, which would be the most evil, vile creature that masquerades as a human, the true monster of the story, if you will. Who could I be talking about, you might ask? You'd think I'd take the easy route and go for Kanki, but you would be wrong. I mean, he does scoop out eyeballs, that's pretty fucked up. Okay, well, how about King Tojo, you might say then? I mean, he is a pretty despicable man, whose death is extremely satisfying. But if you think for 1 second that I would dare slander the name of our honorary 6th grade general, the true hero in the conquest to take Zhao under the name of our Qin banner, then you, my friend, are wrong. You should have known better. No matter what you guessed, it's probably wrong. For I, your 100-man commander, have bamboozled you. Today, we'll be talking about a man who is the main focal point of Kingdom. Dare I say, the most important character. The greatest hero as well as the greatest villain. I will be talking about our beloved young king of Qin, Ace, or Ying Zhang, whichever you know him better by. Either way, that doesn't matter, because I will not be talking about his portrayal in the manga per se, but more of who the real Qin Shi Huangdi is known to have been. We will be discussing whether his flaws and many goofs outweigh his accomplishments. If you aren't caught up in the Kingdom manga, or you aren't interested in any possible historical spoilers, that all starts right now. Manga readers be damned. I'm going to be referring to Ace as Ying Zhang for the rest of this video, so keep that in mind. A young Ying Zhang was born in the year 259 BC while his father, Prince Yiren of Qin, was being held captive in the state of Zhao, working in their court as was custom for the times. Lu Buwei, who was a merchant, a rising star, if you will, someone who I personally am very interested in. I will be making future videos on him undoubtedly, so more about him in the future. Lu Buwei took the opportunity to introduce the lovely Lady Zhao Ji, who was a concubine of his. He, through his crazy machinations, was able to ascend Prince Yiren to the throne of Qin, making him the king. Young Ying Zhang would spend his early days in Zhao, where he was basically being held as captive, for his father had the potential to rise to the throne. He was treated like absolute trash. That's how it's depicted in the Kingdom manga. I'm sure it wasn't too far off from that. Before he ended up becoming a lifetime prisoner in the country of Zhao, he was swiftly whisked away to safety in Qin. After a short-lived reign, like seriously just a mere 3 years on the throne, in the year 246 BC, Zhang's father, Shuang Xiang, king of Qin, passes away, leaving the young 13-year-old a seat as the king of Qin, which at the time had already gathered immense military strength and arguably could be regarded as the most powerful state at the time, with Lu Buwei acting as the regent or prime minister. This is where his story truly begins. Needless to say, Ying Zhang's upbringing was very chaotic and turbulent. This could cause him to be a little screwed up for the rest of his life. Countless times during the crusade to unify the land, attempts were made on Zhang's life and seat to the throne, all of which were unsuccessful. The two that I want to focus on in this video are that of his younger brother, Cheng Jiao, or Saikyo, who felt his rightful throne had been stolen out from under him, and then Lao Ai. In both occasions, we see glimpses of Zheng's cruelty, but you could argue that, as king, he had every right to make those decisions, considering that it endangered his life and that of his country. In the case of Cheng Jiao's rebellion, the young man groomed to become king his whole life had it all stripped away when an older half-brother appears seemingly out of nowhere. Cheng Jiao throws a rebellion which is subsequently shut down. All of his retainers and supporters, as well as their families, were put to death. After Cheng Jiao's rebellion years down the road, in 239 BC, Lao Ai, a man presented to the Queen Dowager by Lu Buwei in an attempt to distance himself from her and avoid Zheng becoming privy to their relationship, which had been a constant thing throughout their whole lives. Lao Ai bedded the queen, had multiple children with her, and he wanted more. He never had money, and now he's being showered with riches. It's even reported that he got so cocky, on one occasion, a drunken Lao Ai was overheard bragging about being King Zheng's stepfather. Shortly after, while King Zheng was away on a trip, Lao Ai took the royal seal and raised an army in an attempt to become a king himself. Zheng sent Cheng Wen and Cheng Ping, who were Shohei-kun and Shobun-kun respectively for the manga readers, to deal with the rebels. Hundreds died in the conflict, and Lao Ai actually managed to escape captivity. That didn't last long, as a 1 million copper bounty was placed on his live capture, half dead. He was soon found, torn apart into 5 pieces by horse carriage. His whole family, to the 3rd degree, was killed, as well as his supporters, and the 2 infant children Ai had had with the queen, making them Ying Zhang's siblings, were put into sacks and beat to death. That's some Game of Thrones shit. Snuffing out the possibility of either of them raising up in revolt and threatening his seat. The queen was subsequently placed on permanent house arrest. Prime Minister Lu Buwei was implicated in the whole plot and was stripped of his titles and banished to Shu, a region in the state of Qin, where a few years later, according to what knowledge we have left of this time, he committed suicide. That is right, suicide. Tragic. I wanted to talk about those 2 instances briefly to highlight glimpses of King Zheng's cruelty, which I would argue in those cases was permissible. That was all set up for the insanity that occurs in the time after the unification of the land, and he dons the name Qin Shi Huangdi, or Emperor. This is where it gets wacky. Later, at the end of his life, he would even go on to tack the Immortal to his name. Before I get more into that, I would like to note that his personal names that identified him before becoming emperor were now taboo, and he was very specific about the way he was addressed. For instance, Your Majesty was used when speaking to him in person, and when referring to him in writing, it was Your Highness. I don't know how punishable these were, but that's just a little weird that those are some leftover details we have. Anyway, on to Qin Shi Huangdi, the emperor, formerly known as Ying Zhang, king of Qin. So after unifying the states, our boy Zhang dubs himself Qin Shi Huangdi. Together with his prime minister Li Si, they made many reforms that arguably completely changed the politics and governing of China till this day, thousands of years later. So let's run through the good parts of this economic transformation and then the bad. Under the Qin dynasty, they did away with feudalism and transformed it into legalism, which is basically what we have all over the world today. Not that it was unheard of at this time, but this was the biggest chunk of land to fall under one rule up until this point in history, as far as I know. Legalism is pretty much strict sets of laws with extreme punishments if broken. They also set universal sets of measurements, road widths, axle build for carts, wheels, language and writing systems, which was monumental at the time. Overall, the land they ruled was broken into 40 sections by the end of it, which I would equate to being similar to the states here in the United States. They also did away with the aristocracy, in which royalty in relationships outranked pure skills and merit, which is huge for our boy Ri Xin. In the long run, that's all completely transformative for the land overall, and a lot of good came out of it. But now for the cons. Due to wanting a universally written language, books and stories that featured other languages or the old languages that derived from each other, they were all banned. They were burned. Countless historical texts were burned, which is horrible. But in the long run, admittingly didn't end up affecting too much of the history, as a lot of stories were passed down orally at the time. Qin Shi Huangdi also dismantled Lu Buwei's 100 schools of thought, which included Confucianism at the time, which happened to be a rising religion. It's said that over 400 scholars were buried alive. Admittingly, after the Qin dynasty, Confucianism continued to gain popularity, and it's totally a possibility that the buried alive story could just be that, a story in an attempt to demonize Huangdi and separate themselves from the Qin altogether. Now for the architectural achievements made during Huangdi's reign. Let's start this section of the video off with by far the most well-known achievement to this day. It is known as one of the 7 wonders of the world, a little thing called the Great Wall of China. The actual wall that was built back then has been changed and rebuilt due to erosion, but they've been preserving it the best they can. The wall's intention was to stop the Quanrong and other mountain tribes' constant raids. So good to know the relationship between the Qin and the Lord of Death, Yotanwa-sama, may sour later in the story. This wall is a massive achievement, but it's said that thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, died during the wall's construction, which is debatable due to the overall population of people it's thought to be anyway. Next up is the Lingwu Canal, or Lingshu, I don't know how to pronounce it. It was built to connect China's weaving waterways and make transporting goods and people more efficient. Needless to say, due to horrible conditions, many also perished in the construction of the canal. Last but not least is Qin Shi Huangdi's legendary mausoleum. This bad boy is fitted out with over 8,000 terracotta soldiers, all of whom are individually distinguished and brandishing a large army of weaponry. Fully sculptured life-size animals, carts, and just everything you could need in an army makes up this enormous mausoleum. And that's just the tip of the iceberg with this thing. All courtesy of Meng Tian, whom Qin Shi Huangdi ordered to oversee the construction of. Massive numbers of people died in the construction of these projects and in the process of economic, political, and philosophical reform. These are monumentally legendary feats, but remember, they were built on the backs of slaves. Some would say greatness takes sacrifice, and perhaps without that, the world would have been completely different today. I still think, even though it's harder to work things out with people, and it may very well be easier to just be a tyrant when you're well within the law to do terrible things, but being such a harsh emperor completely turned the people against the Qin dynasty in the end. Qin Shi Huangdi's greatest enemy was himself. His empire was built on the backs of so many supporters who many eventually turned their back, and due to this, the empire completely falls apart just within a few years after his death. Qin Shi Huangdi reigned as emperor until 210 BC, when he passed away from sickness believed to be due from mercury pills he was ingesting in the pursuit of immortality. Death was a topic that the great emperor shied away from, paranoid that anyone would make an attempt on his life at any moment. He was extremely strict and took his safety seriously. This pushed many close cohorts away, and he was also constantly consuming strange things in an attempt to stave off death. As I mentioned earlier, he even went as far as to put the immortal at the end of his name. And at least you can't say he was wrong. With many adaptations in pop culture, his monumental contributions, unifying the land, the architectural feats, the economic reforms, he will always be remembered in some way as long as humanity exists in one form or another. Whether it's for the good or the bad, Qin Shi Huangdi most certainly has an awfully bloody history. And I would argue that while being the hero of this story, was also quite villainous in the pursuit to unify the land and the reforms that happened overall afterwards. The Qin dynasty was short-lived, but never forgotten. While I do think his contributions are huge overall, inevitably the land would have been unified and all of this would have been set. It's more than likely that the person to do it, if not Qin Shi Huangdi, probably would have been just as bad, if not worse. I was thinking more about this video while I was at work, and I came to the conclusion that Kingdom's manga, the way they characterize these bloody, cruel historical figures as heroes fighting for a righteous cause, I got to thinking that what if in some kind of weird alternate timeline, Hitler unified the world, it broke apart a couple times, a lot of the atrocities that the Nazis committed were erased, and then like 2,000 years down the road, all they know is that Hitler unified the world and gave us universal measurements and blah blah blah, and then someone makes a badass Hitler manga. You know what I'm saying? Maybe that's an absolutely terrible comparison. If you like this video, please subscribe to the channel to keep up with all of the dope anime and manga content. I'll say it again, I know this video is quite different from anything I've done yet. I'm curious to see the reception on it. Hope you all have been well. Slate D Biggs, over and out.